Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a Learning and Growing webinar on the unseen struggles of immigrant and refugee students and how to help. Our presenter today is Elena Newman of Southeast Community College. My name is Sidra, and I'm going to be your moderator today for Hawks Learning. We do have a Q&A module for you all to drop in any questions that you have throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to get them answered. You may also use the chat feature to drop in any questions that you have, and we'll be sure to answer them as we go. I'll now hand it over to our presenter.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. It's a very important topic. It's something that I have a passion for, but I think as an educator, and I'm sure fellow educators will be, I shared this with fellow educators as well who will be on this webinar. It'll be helpful to try to figure out, how you can help students who come from a variety of backgrounds. And a lot of this information comes from textbooks, but some of the experiences may not necessarily come from textbooks. And they're actually based on my personal experiences and experiences of those who have immigrated, that I have personally talked to either through my dissertation process or otherwise. But I shared my screen and I'm hoping everybody can see my screen. It should have a PowerPoint on it.
Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. So as was mentioned, the topic of today's presentation is unseen struggles of immigrant and refugee students and how to help them. And a disclaimer is that some of the topics in this presentation is pertinent to my local residents. So a lot of the statistics are for my local district, so Lincoln, Lancaster County in Nebraska. Some of the information may be my personal experience with input from others like me. It may not necessarily contain information word for word from books and research, as many immigrants, for a variety of reasons, fear participating in research and or do not participate in research for other reasons other than fear per se. So objectives of this presentation is to foster understanding of immigrant and refugee situation that you may not read about in literature and offer ways to help immigrants and refugees, immigrant and refugee students succeed. And if you have questions, go ahead and ask them as you have them, and I'll try to answer them as we're going through the presentation so that I make sure that I address the questions before we get to the end. So who am I? I am an immigrant refugee myself. I am 100% Armenian. So in history, you hear about the Armenian genocide, and my family was part of that genocide. And I am second generation genocide survivor in the family. So I came to the US when I was 10 and I had no English whatsoever. I came knowing zero. My dad knew American English and Old English, and that really didn't help very much. So both of my parents had to learn. I went to school and graduated as a salutatorian of my class in 2002. And this is important for me because education is very important to where I'm from. And so it is an achievement that's tied to my self-concept. And I went to college and I finished my PhD in 2020. And this is a shameless plug for my dissertation. I use my dissertation in this presentation, but my dissertation was about the acculturation process and the resources, whether certain kinds of resources would help the immigration or the acculturation process. And so I did 10 years worth of work on my dissertation. So I figured I would use the statistics from it and the information from it. Why not? I work in a few service professions. So I work in education, I'm a healthcare provider, and I'm a business owner. Plus I'm involved in a few volunteer efforts locally, which is in some way, shape, or form addresses the immigrant and refugee resettlement efforts and or helping the immigrant refugee population acculturate to the life in the US. So there are a lot of different types of immigrants, and that the slide that you're seeing lists all of the different kinds. It is not an exclusive list. I'm sure there are more and or subcategories, but when we talk about immigrants, we're talking about a big population of individuals. So there are two main tasks of an immigrant, and just for time's sake, I'm just going to refer to the population in this that I'm referring to in this webinar as immigrants, even though there are many reasons why people come to the US. So there are two main processes. There's the acculturation process, which is the entire process of starting over. So imagine getting moved without choice from point A to point B. And without choice, I'm going to use loosely, because people do have a choice, but they don't have a choice. So if their safety is at risk, if their well-being or their family's well-being is at risk, yes, they could stay in their country of origin, but a lot of times they don't, in order to protect themselves and their family. So a lot of times, even though there is a quote unquote choice, there's really not a choice. So imagine yourself being taken from one place and put into another place, and not knowing the language, not knowing the rules, not knowing anything, losing everything, not being able to bring any of your belongings. For many people, that is a reality, and many people go through what's called the acculturation process. So it's a multidimensional process that consists of the confluence among heritage, cultural, and receiving cultural practices, values, and identifications, and involves looking at changes that take place as a result of contact with culturally dissimilar people groups and social influences. So that's the acculturation process. That's one of the processes. And then the second process that happens sometimes at the same time is the enculturation process. And that is taking parts of the new culture and incorporating it into one's own life. So some of the statistics, and again, some of these are national, some of these are going to be more local, but you can find these statistics for your area. If you, and you can Google that information and or use a variety of government resources to find this information. But the Brightside Foundation in 2021 stated that there are 44.9+ million immigrants living in the US in 2019. Now, these are 2019 statistics. This was a 2021 source. I'm sure the numbers are a lot more, they're different. And it might be more immigrants here in the United States, especially with the resettlement efforts that have just occurred and are currently occurring. So I'm guessing the number is higher today. 32% of naturalized citizens speak English not well, and 28% of immigrants live in linguistic isolation. As far as Lincoln-Lancaster County is concerned, Lincoln-Lancaster County passed a welcoming and belonging strategic plan. So they developed that plan, and I am a member of the steering committee of that plan. And so Lincoln, Nebraska is an immigration hub. And so we came to Lincoln, Nebraska as immigrants and refugees. And Nebraska has resettled more refugees per capita than in any other state. And this was a statistic back from 2016. It's home to 30,000 immigrants and refugees from around 150 different countries. The county, so Lancaster County population increased 6.5% overall in the last 5 years, but the immigrant population increased 16.2%. So it is a large growing population. So here are some countries of origin. So we see Mexico and Vietnam, China, Iraq, and Sudan. Again, these are older statistics. I'm sure in some in the future we'll see Afghanistan in our statistics, as well as Ukraine in our statistics. And some of the top languages that are spoken at home, and again, this pertains to Lincoln, Nebraska, is Spanish, Vietnamese, and Chinese. Those are top three. 23.3% of immigrants in Lancaster County are recent arrivals, so no more than 5 years of residency. and 29.7% are more likely to be of working age than US counterparts. So they're actively working in the workforce and are contributing to the economy. So some of the support, when we talk about support, there are two kinds of support, and this is what I talk about in my dissertation. A lot of times what we hear about is the monetary support, which I consider organizational resources. These are things like Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps. These are all tied to financial support of some sorts. The other side is the personalized resources or the personalized welcome that immigrants and refugees receive. These are social connections, social support. This is where we struggle as a country, and this is my humble opinion, where we provide the monetary resources, but we do not provide enough of the social connection and the social support that is needed for immigrants and refugees to be successful. As far as the resources that are available, and again, your area may be a little bit different, but you may have some branches of these resources. We have Catholic Social Services, we have Lutheran Family Services, and that is misspelled. I will change that before I send out the PowerPoint. My Link is an app that we have on our, that the city has developed for the app, as an app through Apple and Google stores, that has a lot of information available about the different resources that Lincoln Lancaster County offers. There are also various cultural support groups like the Yazidi group, the Ukraine support group, and others. Lincoln Lancaster County Plan, as I mentioned, I'm a steering team member, and there are a lot of steering team members that are either business owners or part of the groups that provide services for immigrants and refugees. ELL Welcome Center through LPS, that's the Lincoln Public School System, have hired bilingual liaisons to help with translation efforts. And then a variety of cultural centers in Lincoln, and they're all listed there. And again, I'm sure other areas of the country also have some of these resources. We also have the New Americans Task Force, which is a connectors program. It's more of a mentorship and a networking opportunity for foreign trained professionals that are seeking career advancement services. And My City Academy empowers new American community leaders in Lincoln to strengthen their ability to advocate, navigate, and impact local government services. So again, these are just a few resources that are available locally. So what is truly important, and this is the meat of what I wanted to talk about and what I wanted to present today. What is important when we're dealing with immigrant and refugee populations? The first thing is there is a silent period. And a lot of times the silent period is viewed as a personality trait. So, you know, they're not wanting to talk, they're not wanting to interact, they separate themselves, they don't, they feel, it's almost like they want to alienate themselves. And that is just the process. It's part of the acculturation process. And so they might be unwilling or unable to communicate, even though they understand what is happening around them. And that happens for a variety of different reasons. It could be that they feel inept, they feel like they can't, they feel like they won't be taken seriously. They may have an accent that they are conscious about, whatever the reason may be. So, and a lot of times they're afraid of being misunderstood or made fun of or bullied. So how long does this process last? It varies. It can take a year, it could take 2, 3, 5, 10. They might open up a little bit here and there, but then kind of close up again. It depends on the individual person. So a thing to remember, and this is more from an academic as well as just interaction wise, is to not force them to speak. Let them do it at their own pace, at their own time. They need time to listen to others talk, interpret, and make sense of what is said. And then also observe how others are interacting with one another, because even that is different from country to country. Students in ELL classes, so a lot of times you'll have students who are taking English language learner classes in order to polish their English skills. These are formally called ESL classes. So these can help these students to begin to get the vocabulary that is necessary to feel comfortable communicating. So encouraging them to participate in these classes, whether they're adults or high school K-12, not high school, but primary school K-12, it's an important step in the communication process. Asking yes or no questions, paying attention to some nonverbal communication like facial expressions, miming, and or pictures. So whether you draw pictures or they draw pictures, either way, that is a mode of communication. When they're comfortable, you can engage in what's called shared experiences. I know in my elementary school, I had a word of the week that I taught to my classmates. That was a word I chose in the Russian language to share with my classmates. And then we would have a word that all of us knew and I didn't feel so excluded. Ask a person to teach a word in his or her own language or share a word less formal in the student's home language. Using drawings, as I said, mother, father, etc. I use drawings quite a bit when I was going through the process, even things like going to the bathroom, trying to draw pictures of going to the bathroom. And I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination. So it was challenging. That was one of the ways that I was able to communicate, however. And then watching the child play on the playground. And so kind of watching them interact with others, introducing other modes. So if they, instead of recess, if they want to do something else, for example, in my elementary classroom, I had little ducklings that I always wanted to play with. So my teacher let me play with the ducklings until I was comfortable going outside and kind of being around others. And or I had an interest in computers that grew into a more extensive interest as I kind of acculturated and enculturated into the US culture. So observing the things that they're kind of naturally drawn to can help build that relationship and build that trust. So some of the unique challenges that you'll see is stress from cultural changes. And the biggest change is from an individualistic culture to or from a collectivistic culture to an individualistic culture. They're used to being a part of a bigger group, but when they come to the United States, especially into a new area, they don't know where those groups are. And so that's why it's important to establish connections and social interaction as soon as possible. So US is very focused on individualism. So many immigrants and refugees feel alienated and like they don't belong. There are also new norms and expectations as far as language is concerned. So English is said to be one of the hardest languages to learn, and I will testify to that. New American Task Force Immigrant and Refugee Survey used responses from 500 immigrants and refugees living in Lincoln. The survey found that English acquisition is important to immigrants and refugees and for their long-term goals. Nearly all respondents, 99.8%, agreed or strongly agreed that English is important to their everyday lives, and 99% of respondents indicated English is important to their long-term goals. So knowing the language, it's a connective piece. And one of the ways you learn language is through social connections. The other thing is behaviors that are expected out of men, women, parents, children, at school, at work, etc. So at least initially, certain cultures adhere to strict sex gender roles. So men work, women take care of the household, and men and women are not on the same level. So don't be surprised if you see, if you ask a question of the female and the male responds. So it could be either her father or her husband who responds, or her older brother. So that is a dynamic that a lot of times I see in my students, and I understand where it comes from. Parents and children are also not on the same level. Children are considered beneath parents, so no one asks permission for anything of children. It puts children in an interesting situation when they have to translate for their parents. And so a lot of times parents may harbor resentment towards their children because the dynamic of the parent-child relationship has now shifted. Direct communication, especially with students, immigrant and refugee students, is very important because it builds trust and or it can create distrust. So for example, if you're telling somebody, well, you're doing well, you're not doing bad, you're doing well. A lot of times to immigrants and refugees when you ask them what well means to them, if they can communicate, they'll tell you, I need to get an A, because that is what their parents tell them they have to do. That is what their drive is towards. But if they have a C in the class and you tell them that they're doing well, you're creating a conflicting message. And so it's important to be direct in communication and asking questions, leading questions that will help clarify to them and to you that you're kind of on the same page. Feeling like they must choose between the home, new culture, children will struggle the most with this. Parents will try to continue to instill values from home. Meanwhile, children must survive. And sometimes it really isn't possible to blend cultures as they are vastly different. Children want to engage with others in the US and be part of the group, but it's harder to fit in. Immigration status is a scarlet letter, pretty much. They do not fit in, and everybody knows that they are an immigrant refugee. When I went to, not my elementary school, but middle school and high school, I was one of the few students in that school who was an immigrant refugee. And so it almost immediately, people could pick me out in a crowd because I was different, because people knew I was different. Discrimination, bullying, racial slurs, hate crimes are all part of kind of the life that immigrants and refugees have to navigate. So stereotypes are societal misconceptions about a group of people. Prejudices are where people own the stereotypes and they make them their own. And discrimination is actively mistreating individuals, and that is on all levels. So 9/11 and COVID are good examples of where discrimination, bullying, kind of all of that came, and even some ADA problems that came as a result of a lot of the surrounding the event. So mandates created many struggles specifically for immigrants and refugee students. And a lot of times immigrants and refugees could not express themselves or could not tell somebody that they are having issues or that they experienced issues or that they needed help with something. Okay, fostering an environment of welcome. So that is very important. I remember stepping foot into one of the public schools here in town, and I saw welcome in all sorts of languages at the first wall that you see that when you walk into the building, and that felt welcoming as I was searching through the wall to see if I could find welcome in my own language. Getting them connected to a support group, either at a school or at a college or even within a community. It feeds their desire for collectivism. And this is not therapy, and I'll share a little bit later why this is important. Help them establish permanent residency or citizenship for protection. So remember, a lot of immigrants and refugees, they are immigrants and refugees because they did not feel like they did not belong in their home country. So if they were persecuted for any sort of variable, the only way for them to feel protected here is they have to have citizenship that prevents them from being told you can't stay here. And I know that's an interesting view, but it is a realistic view that a lot of times you don't hear immigrants say. There's a difference between a residency and citizenship. And what they're longing for, what they celebrate, what they earn for is that citizenship. So policies need to be worked out to make this more attainable. And passing of a naturalization test is important. My mom was the one who did who passed the naturalization test. And because my brother and I were minors, we became US citizens automatically upon her passing of the citizenship test. Let's see, learning English. So there is no expectation, and I repeat, there is no expectation that immigrants and refugees have of people learning their language. But there is a huge appreciation when people try to learn a few words here and there. So again, that builds that connection and that interaction. And again, English is a difficult language because there are a lot of fluffy rules without explanation. So for example, I before E except after C, nobody could tell me why that was. And then what is said actually matters because immigrants and refugees will attach literal meanings to language. For example, we're gonna eat dirt cake. Now to you, you know what that means. To an immigrant refugee, they literally think you're gonna eat dirt. And that was my experience, and that scared me until I figured out what dirt cake was. And then avoiding semantics, kind of like go break a leg or go sell yourself. We know what that means. Immigrants and refugees will take that literally, and they will wonder why you wish harm on them or why would you ask them to sell themselves. And people talk fast. English language compared to other languages, the speed at which people talk, not only talk, but also the pronunciations that people use, the dialects that people use, it's different from area to area. So it's important not to yell because they can hear you. They just need you to slow down sometimes. The other thing is transportation. Like how do they get from point A to point B? Do they need a bus pass? Do they want a car? Driver's test. What do they need to do to pass a driver's test? And then staying connected. They need a cell phone. How do you go and get a cell phone? Again, a lot of times money is given, but the how to it kind of falls through the cracks. Housing. Many areas of the country are actually having a horrible housing situation right now where there is not enough housing. So navigating that environment is stress in and of itself. Work and employment, removing licensing barriers and or clarifying some licensing barriers or clarifying some licensing things. For example, many come with incomplete paperwork and they can't get a job until the paperwork comes through. So how can we make that process easier, faster, more streamlined? There's a lot of things we could potentially do with that process. And then money, of course, money is important. Many come with little to no money. So Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps help until the family can get on its feet and obtain basic needs. But it's important for them to feel like they are contributing. And again, that's where we see a huge disconnect. The ultimate goal of many of these families and many of these people is to start businesses to provide for their own families, to get off government resources and to be independent. And so how to do that, it is what they ultimately want to know. K-12 education in many countries, K-12 education is not guaranteed. In some countries, 3rd grade, 4th grade is as far as you go. And college is even more distant. So when immigrants and refugees have these opportunities, they love the educational component. However, it is vastly different than what they're used to. So they need a lot more support They need help navigating standardized testing. They need to know what a FAFSA is. They have no idea what a FAFSA is. And again, they have language barriers. Healthcare. Caution. There is a caution that I would like to put in here about mental health. Mental health is not a thing in most countries. And this is why on the previous slide, I said their collectivistic need, that's not therapy. That's not group therapy. And many in the US will utilize mental health resources, and rightfully so. And they a lot of times will say, well, if I use it, then they should use it too. They need to go and get these resources. The problem is that it can actually, at least in the beginning for immigrants and refugees, can actually do more damage than good, because mental health is a taboo topic in a lot of countries. And so a person can inadvertently be alienated from their culture by participating in therapy or even taking medications. And so it's a very, very fragile topic to discuss or to navigate. And then the other thing is there are not enough doctors who know the intricacy of certain cultures, the sensitivity to men being seen by male doctors and women being seen by female doctors, especially for like childbirth and female related issues. That's where we find a lot of hesitancy and a lot of fear and a lot of concern. And so a lot of times those social connections, having someone who can go to those appointments with a person is very helpful. Specifically, for example, another female going with a female who has immigrated to the US, that can be very helpful and very de-stressing, I guess, if that's a word. Other skill sets, bills, banking. Most people come from cash societies, and so trying to understand credit cards, banks, loans, that you have to pay loans back. Checking account only has a certain amount of money in it. Why a debit card won't work when you run out of money in your checking account. All of those things are important, and again, could easily be navigated through social connections. Insurance. Most people who come to the US, like my family, for example, we didn't have cars. We didn't drive cars. We didn't even have our own home. We rented. So car insurance, home insurance, what in the world is that? Life insurance, why am I insuring my own life? What's the point of that? Health, vision, dental insurance. Again, a lot of immigrants and refugees don't know what these concepts are because they never had to deal with it where they're from. You may see withdrawal from social situations. You may see a lot of distrust in a lot of governmental entities and other people. Many immigrants and refugees will not get involved in politics. They will not go to, let's say, a boss and say, I'm having an issue with that, because they see that as part of rules, part of governmental control, entity, whatever. They will not approach certain individuals because of their status. So a boss, a principal for kids who are in school, for a dean, for example, at a college level, or an associate dean at a college level, because they are very distrustful, and they are not only distrustful of the big names or the big people of who they consider to be big people in higher positions, but they're also distrustful in other people, that others will have their best interest at heart. Children grow up fast. Like I mentioned before, they're used as translators. So a lot of times there's resentment from parents, and school is really the only place they have to be kids. And so a lot of times that's a struggle. So sympathy versus empathy. care to not treat as victims, not coddling, not belittling, not help, but assist. And, I'll do it with you rather than for you. There's a huge emphasis on empowerment and allowing them to kind of go through the motions of doing something for themselves. And then it makes them feel better rather than making them feel helpless, in order, rather than helping them feel helpless. Okay, so how do we integrate this into academics? So many will come into your classrooms or offices, not only with school issues, but also social issues like low socioeconomic status, few social support systems, and threat of family separation. So there is a huge language barrier. 1 in 10 students in public schools, there is a language barrier. There's a vast majority. This is from the article, Sanchez article. Vast majority of students in ELL will speak Spanish, and that may vary from area to area. But other languages are prevalent as well, and we're seeing a growth in many different languages. So in certain part of the country, I included this infographic that there are other languages prevalent in certain parts of the country. And I will make this PowerPoint available, or the PDF of this PowerPoint available to anybody who wants it. So you don't have to go back and research these statistics, but you'll have at least a starting point. Okay, here we go. And then most of your English language learner are born in the US. So you could see, you could see that with this statistic here, with this picture here. Some of the states that have the highest ELL numbers per state: California, Texas, Florida, New York. And we expect that's to be expected because the states are on the coasts. And 2000 to 2014, the growth was highest in Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, North and South Carolina. There is a struggle with little to no access to education that is tailored to them. They excel in math, but they're extremely behind in English at some points. And like I said, I had no English, but I know some people come here with basic English. And so they're at all different levels. 90% are enrolled in ELL, but the quality of programs is questionable and or not consistent. It's not standardized. And so you may have different students in different part of the country get different ELL training. So identifying ELL students can be tricky, but it usually can be done through a survey. And many of them lack in achievement behind their US born counterparts. And many are not transitioning to English fast enough because they go back home and they are speaking their home language at home, and then coming, outside of their home, they're talking in English. They don't have the chance to immerse themselves in the English language. Academically, they're segregated and they fall behind basic subjects. Only 63% graduate from high school compared with 82% average, and 1.4% take college entrance exams. Gifted ELL, 2% are enrolled in gifted programs versus 7.3% of non-ELL students. They know the material, but a lot of times they're overlooked because they're considered not as smart because they can't communicate or don't want to communicate, or they can't communicate how much of an achievement they have or how much of a skill set they have. And then they tend to be kept out of accelerated programs because of ELL issues. So learning English is pertinent. And not doing, so a lot of times you'll see this as not doing the work because they don't understand the directions. A lot of times they're mistakenly placed into special education classes. They have lower academic success rates, and that feeds into the low self-esteem due to social isolation. So what I have seen as a faculty member, the first sign of a struggle is class attendance, and then the coursework issues start. And so some of the reasons behind that is the cultural, kind of their cultural background, their view of the self, and then their home commitment. So again, they're kind of stuck between the collectivistic, individualistic. A lot of them work in order to support for their families. And many times they are the breadwinner because their parents, if their parents are elderly and or their parents don't know the language very well, they're not going to be working. And so the kids are then responsible for taking care of the financial responsibilities. And a lot of times there is lack of support on campus as far as social connections go. So my hope and dream is to spread the word locally and nationally and be involved in as many activities as I am able to be involved in, create opportunities for students to interact with each other, even locally on a local level. I love the idea of low risk roundtable discussions. I've been getting my name out on campus, at least locally, and then nationally, not nationally, at the college level, as well as the city, county level. And possible creation of a group on campus leading to a buddy system. Anything formal until the trust is established is out of the question, because in order to create that environment, they have to have trust in the process first. And so once you have trust, then you can build from there and eventually get involvement in the community efforts. So what and who helped me as far as my journey? So ESL, ELL class, definitely I had a silent period and teachers were my friends. My age group, I felt didn't understand me because I have seen too much. I have experienced too much. Supportive network of people around me. So my religious group, a religious affiliation, and then other Armenian families, although I had to eventually distance myself because it became kind of everybody kind of, it's a competitive kind of environment rather than an embracing kind of environment. It became too competitive between people. Actual discrimination made me stronger and more resilient. So I remember being called an alien because I had a green card. I was bullied quite a bit. And even today as a US citizen, there are some backhanded comments that are made either towards me or behind my back that eventually get to me. But I don't, I personally don't let those stop me. I attribute that to no information or lack of information, which is one of the reasons why I'm out speaking about this. And then intrinsic motivation, a lot of immigrants and refugees have intrinsic motivation to succeed. And I am by definition a functional introvert. Finding opportunities to blend two cultures, dance is how I do that. That's my hobby. In fact, my husband and I are both ballroom dancers, and that is how I blend my love for dance and kind of being able to communicate various parts of myself with dance through the dances that we do. Being involved through community efforts, being a voice for those who can't speak. Dating and marriage, I have a daughter who's 15 years old, and my view is a lot different. It's not, the rules are still there, at least for me and my culture, but it's a lot less lax than what my rules were. Parenting, so having an authoritarian parent versus an authoritative parent. I'm more of an authoritative parent where I will explain the whys and let's talk about it, let's discuss it kind of thing. Overnight stays are one of the things that comes to mind. I know my mom never let me stay overnight at anybody's house. And it was kind of a thing that kind of made me wonder, well, why? Like, what's so wrong with that? But like my daughter has that opportunity. She has the opportunity to do overnight stays and kind of interact with other families. And then the non-victim mentality. A victim label for me is I consider it very disrespectful and demeaning. So I always say I'm a survivor, I'm not a victim. Empathy is important, but it's not always possible because we don't have direct experience with in some situations. But sympathy can help, but that's not the primary it's not primary for a lot of immigrants and refugees. You know, the idea is don't feel sorry for me, help, you know, assist me, show me how to do it so I can do it on my own. And then ultimately emphasis on control of one's destiny, no one else. I ultimately had to make that my own, that I'm responsible for my own actions, my own destiny, my choices, my decisions, not anybody else's. And I have decided to be my authentic, determined self. And if that doesn't sit well with people, then I guess that doesn't sit well with people. But those are the things that kind of helped me find who I was. I had to make conscious choices of what I embraced and what I let go of. So I found my voice after high school graduation. And from a young age, I valued accountability, which takes care of the honesty, loyalty, values, and morals, things that have guided me, in my life in their entirety. So at this point, I know I've said a lot and I had a lot of things I wanted to cover, but I have just enough time to address some questions if anybody wants to address, or if anybody has any questions that they want to ask.
Feel free to drop your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A module, whichever is easier for you guys. While we're waiting for questions to compile, if there are any, do you have any closing remarks?
I appreciate the opportunity to speak and to present on this topic. It's, as you can probably tell, it's a passion of mine. It's hard to know what you don't know, and having a perspective from someone who's experienced it helps sometimes try to navigate some of the struggles and the challenges, especially in higher ed when we're trying to impact outcomes and we're trying to make sure that students are successful when they leave our institutions and are able to become contributing members of our society and feel welcomed and all of those warm and fuzzy things. But we don't know what we don't know, and even being involved in planning and in the strategic plan, some of the supportive or the relationship building components, I brought those to attention in that plan. And a lot of the plan is like things, but it's the interaction of the things with social or the personalized kind of relationship building that ultimately creates success. And I would love to be a contact person if you ever need to reach out to me, if you need help, if you want this to be presented to another group, I would love for you to reach out to me. My email is enewman, ENEWMAN @southeast.edu. I will type it at the bottom there. And then I will also provide my direct cell phone number so that you can contact me at any point, just so you have contact to me at any point. I'm also on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm everywhere. So I would love to help out in any way, shape, or form that is possible.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for attending today. If you or any of your fellow instructors are interested in presenting for our Learning and Growing webinar series, please submit your proposal to the Learning and Growing website, which I'm going to go ahead and link in the chat right now, which just disappeared on me. I'm sorry, guys. 1 second.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. All right. We will be emailing you a link to view the recording of this webinar once it's available, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close out the Zoom. It was a pleasure meeting you and working with you today. Take care.